Steven Seagal disguises himself as a homeless person to test the police, but when the corrupt cops start brutally harassing an elderly Vietnam veteran, they have no idea they're being watched. The crooked sergeant and his rookie partner think they're just bullying another helpless vagrant, kicking over the old soldier's belongings and threatening arrest for simply existing. But the mysterious homeless man observing from the shadows isn't what he appears. This is Steven Seagal himself, the aikido master who spent decades destroying corrupt officials with his bare hands. The dirty cops have just made the worst mistake of their careers, terrorizing a war hero in front of a legend who considers protecting veterans his sacred duty. While the sergeant escalates his abuse, demanding the old man move along or else, the martial arts icon steps forward with that deadly calm that has terrified criminals for generations. The veteran recognizes something familiar in this stranger's warrior bearing, but the cops are too arrogant to notice they're about to face justice. Their backup is on the way, their cameras are rolling, thinking they're documenting another easy intimidation, but they're actually recording the moment their corruption finally meets its match. What happens when dirty cops pick the wrong homeless man to harass? Will the sergeant survive discovering why some warriors never truly retire? What happened next would terrorize these corrupt officers for the rest of their pathetic careers. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Seattle rain had stopped an hour ago, but the streets still gleamed under the amber glow of streetlights. From behind a rusted dumpster outside the Sacred Heart homeless shelter, a figure in tattered clothing watched the scene unfold with the patience of a predator. Police Sergeant Dale Morrison stepped out of his patrol car at 11:47 p.m., his polished boots splashing through a puddle as he adjusted his utility belt. His partner, Officer Rick Vance, emerged from the passenger's side, young and eager, scanning the doorway of the shelter where an elderly man sat hunched against the brick wall. "There's our problem," Morrison muttered, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His stocky frame moved with deliberate intimidation as he approached the figure in the doorway. Walter Kowalski looked up from where he sat, his Vietnam service patches visible on his worn field jacket despite the dim lighting. At 67, the streets had carved deep lines into his weathered face, but his eyes still held the alert awareness of a soldier. A pronounced limp from old shrapnel made him move slowly as he shifted to acknowledge the approaching officers. "You can't sleep here, old man," Morrison declared, his crew-cut head tilted at an aggressive angle. "This is private property." Walter's voice came out steady despite his obvious fatigue. "I'm not sleeping, officer. Just waiting for the morning meal service. Shelter opens at 6. The observer in the shadows leaned forward slightly, weathered, hands gripping a small notebook. Something about those hands didn't match the vagrant appearance. They showed calluses that spoke of years of martial arts training, not just street survival. "I don't care what time they open," Morrison snapped. "You're loitering and creating a public disturbance. Show me some identification." Walter reached into his jacket pocket with careful movements, producing a worn military ID card and a veteran's benefits card. "Sergeant Walter Kowalski, 1st Infantry Division, Vietnam. I served 2 tours, officer. I know my rights." Vance stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow over the seated veteran. At 28, he still possessed the nervous energy of someone trying to prove himself to his senior partner. "Rights?" he scoffed. "You got the right to find somewhere else to be a bum." Without warning, Vance's boot connected with Walter's shopping cart, sending it tumbling across the sidewalk. Canned goods, a tattered American flag, and Walter's few precious possessions scattered across the wet pavement. "Oops," Vance said with mock concern. "Looks like you better clean up this mess before we cite you for littering too." The observer's hands tightened into fists, but he remained motionless in the shadows. Through a concealed camera, he documented every moment as Walter struggled to his feet, his limp more pronounced as he began gathering his scattered belongings. "Please," Walter said quietly, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "That flag belonged to my squad leader. He died saving my life in Saigon." Morrison's laugh was cold and sharp. "Should have thought about that before you decided to become a worthless piece of trash cluttering up our streets." As the 2 officers climbed back, into their patrol car, leaving Walter to collect his possessions alone. The figure in the shadows emerged silently. His movement was fluid, controlled, the gait of someone whose body remained a finely tuned weapon despite his vagrant appearance. "You okay, brother?" The voice was gravelly but carried an unmistakable authority that seemed to cut through the Seattle night air. Walter looked up, and for just a moment, his experienced eyes caught something familiar in this stranger's bearing. The way he held himself, the alertness in his posture, the controlled power in his movements. The stranger introduced himself simply. "Name's Sam." 6:30 in the morning found Sam 3 blocks away at the Emerald City Diner, a 24-hour establishment that catered to dock workers, late-shift nurses, and the occasional vagrant with enough spare change for coffee. The transformation was subtle but significant. His face was cleaner, his posture more upright, though he still wore the same layers of worn clothing. In a corner booth, where he could watch both entrances, Sam removed a secure satellite phone from a hidden pocket sewn into his tattered jacket. The device looked impossibly sophisticated compared to his homeless appearance as he dialed a number from memory. "Reeves." The voice that answered was crisp, professional. "It's me," Sam said, his voice now carrying the measured tones of someone accustomed to briefing government officials. "I've got another incident to report." Donald Reeves, chief of staff to Seattle Mayor Patricia Hendricks, had been expecting this call. "What happened this time?" "Morrison and Vance. Badge numbers 4471 and 7823. Harassment, destruction of personal property, verbal abuse of a Vietnam veteran. All documented." Sam's eyes never stopped moving, cataloging every customer, every movement beyond the diners. Rain-streaked windows. "Jesus." Reeves sighed heavily. "That's the 15th incident you've documented in 3 weeks. The mayor's getting pressure from the city council to wrap this up." Sam, whose real name was Steven Seagal, had spent most of his adult life in situations where revealing his true identity meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. 25 years with the CIA had taught him patience. But recent years as a private investigator specializing in corruption cases had shown him how deeply rot could spread through institutions meant to protect people. "The pattern's escalating," Seagal continued, watching a police cruiser roll slowly past the diner. "This isn't random harassment anymore. These officers are targeting specific demographics with military precision. Someone's coordinating this." 3 weeks ago, Mayor Hendricks had hired him after complaints about police misconduct toward the homeless population had tripled, but internal affairs investigations kept coming back with findings of no credible evidence. The mayor needed an outside perspective, someone who could move through the city's underbelly without triggering the defensive responses that official inquiries created. "The mayor wants to know if you're getting too close to something dangerous," Reeves said. "Your cover identity has been solid so far, but if these officers start recognizing you..." Seagal's reflection in the diner window showed a master of disguise who had spent decades becoming whoever a mission required. The unkempt hair, the weathered skin, the defeated posture of someone ground down by life's cruelties. It was all carefully constructed theater. But underneath the performance lived reflexes honed by years of aikido training and combat experience that could emerge without conscious thought. "I can handle myself," he said simply. "But there's something bigger. Here." The homeless veterans I've been talking to mention increased pressure over the past 6 months. They're being systematically pushed out of specific areas of downtown. Development pressure? That's what I'm going to find out." Seagal ended the call and studied his reflection in the black screen of the phone. In an hour, he would transform back into Sam Patterson, drifting vagrant with just enough military background to explain his alertness, but not enough to draw serious attention. He slipped the phone back into its hidden compartment and shuffled to the men's room, where he systematically dirted his appearance, messing his hair, smudging dirt onto his clothes, adopting the slightly hunched posture of someone carrying invisible weights. When he emerged, Steven Seagal had disappeared, replaced by just another homeless man that most people would work hard not to see. The morning commuters were already hurrying past the Sacred Heart shelter when he settled into the same doorway where Walter had been harassed the night before, at by 8:15, the morning. Rhythm around Sacred Heart shelter had established itself with the predictability of a military operation. Volunteers arrived carrying coffee urns and breakfast supplies. Early commuters hurried past with studied indifference, and the homeless community began gathering for what might be their only substantial meal of the day. Seagal sat with his back against the brick wall, a paper coffee cup positioned in front of him for donations, though his real focus was on documenting the patterns of police patrol routes and the subtle hierarchies within the homeless community. Every person who passed represented potential intelligence. Every interaction a piece of the larger puzzle he was assembling. The shelter's front door opened with the sharp squeal of hinges that needed oil, and Dr. Janet Mitchell stepped out into the crisp morning air. At 38, she moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had learned to accomplish enormous tasks with limited resources. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands already showed the slight tremor of someone who had been working since before dawn. She noticed Seagal immediately. In her 5 years running the shelter, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify new faces among the regular population. Her approach was professional but warm, the practiced manner of someone who understood that dignity was often the first casualty of homelessness. "I don't think I've seen you before," she said, crouching down to his eye level. "I'm Dr. Mitchell. Are you hungry? We've got hot breakfast inside, and I can do a quick medical check if you need one." Seagal kept his eyes downcast, maintaining the defeated posture that made him invisible to most people while remaining intensely aware of his surroundings. "Just passing through, ma'am. Don't want to take food from folks who need it more." Something in his voice made her pause. The cadence was wrong for someone who had been on the streets for years. But before she could pursue the thought, Walter Kowalski appeared around the corner, moving slowly due to the injuries from his encounter with Morrison and Vance. "Morning, Doc," Walter said, settling carefully beside Seagal with the grunt of someone whose body carried decades of accumulated damage. "This here's Sam. He helped me pick up my things last night after the badges got done with me." Dr. Mitchell's expression hardened slightly at the mention of police harassment, but she simply nodded and continued on her rounds. Seagal noted her reaction. Here was someone who had seen too much and documented too little to make a difference through official channels that Walter's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You seem like good people, Sam, so I'm going to give you some advice. The badges patrol this area heavy starting around 9:30. Morrison and Vance, they got a thing about this particular corner. Something about keeping the area clean for the business folks." At exactly 9:23, the familiar white and blue patrol car rounded the corner from Pike Street. Seagal didn't need to see the badge numbers to know that Morrison was behind the wheel, his stocky frame visible through the windshield as he spotted the two men sitting by the shelter entrance. The car pulled to the curb with deliberate aggression, and Officer Vance emerged first, his tall frame unfolding with the predatory grace of someone who enjoyed the authority his uniform provided. Morrison followed, adjusting his utility belt and scanning the area like a hunter who had found promising prey. Well, Morrison said, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Looks like we got ourselves a vagrant convention." Vance approached, with the swagger of youth backed by institutional power. "You," he said, pointing directly at Seagal. "Yeah, you with the smart mouth from last night. I told you to move along." Seagal looked up slowly, his face a carefully constructed mask of confusion and submission. "I wasn't here last night, officer. First time I've been in this neighborhood. Don't lie to me, bum." Vance's hand moved to his nightstick with practiced ease. "I never forget a face, especially one that belongs to a smart-ass vagrant who thinks he knows his rights." Walter started to speak up, but Seagal's almost imperceptible headshake stopped him. This was the moment that would define everything. How far these officers were willing to go, how much documentation he could gather, and whether his cover would hold under direct scrutiny. "I'm not looking for trouble," Seagal said in Sam's defeated voice. "Just asking if I'm breaking any laws sitting here. Thought this was public property during business hours." Morrison's face flushed red at the reasonable question, and his hand moved towards Seagal's arm with the casual violence of someone accustomed to compliance through intimidation. Morrison's thick fingers closed around Seagal's arm with the casual brutality of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. The grip was designed to cause pain and establish dominance, the kind of hold that left bruises but rarely left evidence that would matter in court. "Public property, my ass," Morrison snarled, using his leverage to yank Seagal to his feet. "You're trespassing, and I'm placing you under arrest for failure to disperse and disorderly conduct." Seagal allowed himself to be pulled upright, but his body moved with a fluidity that didn't match his vagrant persona. Decades of aikido training had taught him to read force and redirect energy, and Morrison's aggressive pull created an opportunity that his muscle memory wanted to exploit. Instead, he stumbled deliberately, his apparent clumsiness forcing Morrison to use even more force to steady him against the brick wall of the shelter. The impact was harder than necessary, and Seagal felt the rough surface scrape against his back through the worn fabric of his jacket. "Easy there, officer," he said in Sam's submissive tone. "I'm cooperating. No need to get rough." Vance stepped closer, drawing his expandable baton with the metallic snap that was designed to intimidate. At 28, he still possessed the nervous energy of someone trying to prove himself worthy of his senior partner's approval. The weapon extended to its full length with practiced efficiency. "Maybe some time in the county lockup will teach you about respect," Vance said, raising the baton in a threatening gesture that violated every use of force protocol in the Seattle Police Department manual. The movement was telegraphed, obvious to anyone with combat training. Vance's grip was wrong, his stance was unbalanced, and his intention was clear from the way he cocked his arm back for maximum impact. In that instant, Steven Seagal's training overrode his cover identity. The disarm took less than 2 seconds and required no conscious thought. Seagal's left hand deflected the descending baton while his right hand guided Vance's wrist in a circular motion that used the officer's own momentum against him. The Aikido principle of iremi, entering and blending with an attack, turned Vance's aggression into a force that worked against him. The baton clattered to the concrete as Vance found himself spun around and momentarily off balance, his weapon removed so smoothly that he wasn't entirely sure what had happened. The technique was textbook perfect, executed with the kind of precision that came from decades of practice and real-world application. For a heartbeat, silence hung in the morning, air like smoke. Morrison stared at his partner, who was looking at his empty hand with genuine confusion. Walter's eyes widened with recognition. He had seen moves like that before, in places where such skills meant the difference between life and death. Seagal immediately dropped back into character, his posture becoming submissive again as he retrieved the baton and offered it back to Vance with shaking hands. Sorry, he stammered in Sam's defeated voice. "I just flinched when I saw you raise that thing. Didn't mean nothing by it. Just a reflex, you know? Sometimes when people move fast around me, I just react." Vance took his weapon back, but his eyes remained fixed on Seagal's face with newfound suspicion. "That wasn't no flinch, old man. That was some kind of martial arts bullshit." Morrison keyed his radio, his voice tight with suspicion and embarrassment. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. Need you to run a welfare check on a possible 5150 at Sacred Heart Shelter. Male, approximately 55 to 60, claims to be homeless but demonstrates combat training. Requesting backup for evaluation." The radio crackled back immediately. "Copy, Unit 47. Be advised, we have units en route for backup. ETA 3 minutes. Seagal realized his cover was blown, but Sam Patterson still had a role to play. He shuffled backward, muttering to himself in the confused manner of someone whose mental state might legitimately require professional evaluation. "Didn't mean nothing," he repeated, his voice taking on the slightly disconnected quality of someone talking to invisible companions. "Just didn't want to get hit. That's all. Nobody wants to get hit." As he shambled away from the confrontation, Walter fell into step beside him, waiting until they were out of earshot before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "That wasn't no accident, soldier," Walter said, his experienced eyes taking in details that the officers had missed. "Question is, whose side you really on?" Seagal met the veteran's knowing stare, and in that moment, both men understood that facades had been dropped and truths revealed. The mission had just become significantly more complicated, but it had also gained an ally who understood the warrior's code that both men lived by. Behind them, Morrison was already calling for Lieutenant Frank Kellerman, describing the incident, and requesting guidance on how to handle a vagrant who moved like someone with serious military training. The hunt was about to begin. Lieutenant Frank Kellerman arrived at Occidental Park 45 minutes after Morrison's radio call, his unmarked sedan pulling alongside the bench where Seagal sat tending to a minor cut on Walter's hand from the previous night's incident. At 48, Kellerman possessed the calculating intelligence that had allowed him to rise through the ranks while carefully managing his various compromises with integrity. Unlike his subordinates, Kellerman understood subtlety. His approach was measured, professional, designed to gather information rather than simply intimidate. He studied Seagal with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating threats and opportunities. "Morning, gentlemen," Kellerman said, settling onto the bench without invitation. "I'm Lieutenant Kellerman. My officers tell me there was some kind of misunderstanding at the shelter." Walter's response was immediate wariness. 25 years of homelessness had taught him that polite cops were often more dangerous than openly aggressive ones. But Seagal remained focused on cleaning Walter's wound, playing the role of concerned fellow vagrant while cataloging every detail of Kellerman's appearance and demeanor. "No misunderstanding," Seagal said in Sam's defeated voice. "Just a scared old man who flinched when somebody raised a stick at him." Kellerman's smile was thin and calculating. "Funny thing about that flinch. Officer Vance has been carrying a baton for 6 years, and he's never had anyone disarm him with a flinch before." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of 3 other homeless veterans who had been summoned by Walter's emergency radio signal. Tommy Brennan appeared first, his wiry frame and nervous energy marking him as someone perpetually on edge. Maria Santos followed, her compact build and alert posture identifying her as former military even before she spoke. Jerome Washington emerged last from behind a cluster of trees, moving with the fluid silence of someone trained in reconnaissance and observation. His tall frame and constantly scanning eyes marked him as a predator rather than prey, despite his current circumstances. "Problem here, Walter?" Maria asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death. Medical decisions under pressure. Kellerman's expression shifted as he recognized the sudden change in dynamics. What had been a simple interrogation of 2 isolated homeless men had become a potential confrontation with a group of military veterans whose collective experience represented decades of combat training. "Just having a friendly conversation," Kellerman said, but his hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon. "About respect for law enforcement and proper identification procedures." Tommy's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Respect? Like the respect your boys showed Walter last night when they kicked over his cart and called him worthless trash." The lieutenant's radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Unit 23, we have the vagrant under surveillance at Occidental Park. Subject appears to be meeting with known associates. Requesting permission to maintain observation." Jerome's military training immediately recognized the tactical language. "Surveillance," he said quietly to Walter. "They're treating this like a military operation." Kellerman stood slowly, his professional mask slipping slightly to reveal the calculating corruption underneath. "I'd advise you gentlemen to remember that this is still America, where law-abiding citizens respect police authority. Those who don't tend to find themselves facing serious charges." As the lieutenant walked back to his sedan, Maria pressed a small handheld radio into Seagal's palm. "Channel 7, she whispered. "Emergency frequency. We watch out for each other." The radio was military surplus, modified for extended range and encrypted communication. Seagal recognized the sophistication immediately. These weren't ordinary homeless people, but an organized network of veterans who had adapted their military training to urban survival. Walter's voice was quiet, but firm as the police car disappeared around the corner. "Something big is coming, Sam. They're not just harassing us anymore. They're hunting." The police cruiser's slow approach to Occidental Park triggered responses honed by decades of military training. Without visible signals, the veteran network began implementing evasion protocols that would have impressed active-duty special operations units. Jerome Washington melted into the tree line with the silent efficiency of a Marine Corps scout sniper, becoming invisible despite his tall frame. Tommy Brennan's nervous energy transformed into focused alertness as he identified multiple escape routes and potential choke points. Maria Santos maintained her position near Walter, but her hands moved to locations where she kept concealed medical supplies and improvised weapons. Seagal recognized the tactical discipline immediately. These weren't random homeless individuals. They were a coordinated unit whose military training remained sharp despite years of neglect by the society they had served. Lieutenant Kellerman's sedan circled the park twice before parking in a position that allowed observation of the main gathering area. Through the passenger window, Seagal could see Morrison adjusting surveillance equipment while Vance took photographs with a telephoto lens. "They're documenting us," Walter said quietly, his Vietnam experience reading the situation with practiced ease. "Building files, establishing patterns. This is intelligence gathering, not simple harassment." The handheld radio Maria had given him crackled with encrypted chatter as the veteran network shared information about police movements throughout downtown Seattle. The communication was professional, using military terminology and tactical awareness that spoke to ongoing coordination and planning. "Alpha 7, this is Bravo 2, came Jerome's voice from somewhere in the trees. "Count 3 units establishing surveillance perimeter. Pattern suggests coordinated operation, not standard patrol." Tommy's response was immediate. "Bravo 2. Alpha 7, confirming unusual equipment signatures. These aren't standard police radios. Frequency analysis suggests federal-grade encryption." Seagal processed this information with growing concern. Local police departments didn't typically possess encryption technology advanced enough to impress former military communications specialists. Someone with significant resources was coordinating this operation. Maria knelt beside Walter, ostensibly checking his bandaged hand while actually providing cover for quiet conversation. "Sam, whoever you really are, you need to understand what you've walked into. This started 6 months ago with increased patrols, but it's escalated to systematic documentation and harassment, targeting specific populations," Walter added. "Veterans, elderly, disabled. Always in the same downtown areas, always with the same message about cleaning up the streets." The secure phone in Seagal's jacket vibrated with an incoming message, but answering it would compromise his cover. Instead, he used hand signals that Walter immediately recognized. Military tactical communication requesting intelligence briefing. Walter's response was economical and precise. "Development pressure in Pioneer Square, Capitol Hill, and waterfront districts. Property values rising, homeless population being systematically displaced. But the coordination level suggests private funding and federal-level equipment." Tommy suddenly appeared beside them, having used urban camouflage techniques to approach. Undetected, just intercepted radio chatter. "They're calling in Lieutenant Frank Kellerman to coordinate a special investigation of the trained vagrant with possible terrorist connections." The radio crackled again with Jerome's voice. "All units, be advised. Secondary surveillance team approaching from northwest. Count 4 plainclothes officers with professional camera equipment. This is intelligence gathering, not law enforcement." Seagal realized his investigation had triggered a counter-investigation by forces with resources and coordination that exceeded typical police capabilities. Someone had been waiting for exactly this kind of outside interest in their operations. "We need to separate," he told the group. "They're escalating because they know I'm not what I appear to be." Walter's hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "You don't abandon your unit when things get hot, soldier. We've been fighting this alone for months. Now we have someone with skills and resources. Time to take the fight to them." As police cars began converging on their location from multiple directions, Seagal faced a decision that would define the rest of his mission. He could maintain his cover and disappear, preserving his investigation but abandoning these veterans to face retaliation alone. Or he could trust his instincts about their character and accept allies whose military experience might prove invaluable. In the escalating conflict, the choice became academic when Jerome's urgent voice cut through the radio static. "All units, immediate extraction recommended. Count 6 vehicles, estimated 20 officers, full tactical deployment." They're treating this like a high-value target apprehension. The abandoned warehouse south of Pioneer Square had been Jerome Washington's discovery, a 3-story brick structure scheduled for demolition that provided perfect concealment for someone with military reconnaissance training. Seagal followed the Marine veteran through a carefully concealed entrance that required precise knowledge of structural weak points and security blind spots. Inside, the building revealed sophisticated modifications that spoke to organized occupation rather than random squatting. Solar panels rigged to car batteries provided power for communications equipment, while carefully positioned mirrors created observation points covering all approaches. This was a command post built by people who understood operational security. "Welcome to our forward operating base," Walter said with grim humor as he settled onto a makeshift chair constructed from shipping pallets and army surplus gear. "Been planning for something like this since the harassment started escalating." Maria Santos had transformed a corner of the space into a medical station that would have impressed military field medics. Organized supplies, sterilized instruments, and carefully maintained medications created a professional treatment facility using entirely scavenged resources. Tommy Brennan's workspace occupied the opposite corner, where electronics equipment and technical manuals suggested capabilities far beyond basic communication. Devices that looked like civilian radios had been modified with military-grade components to provide encrypted communication and electronic surveillance. Seagal removed his secure phone and activated its recording function, documenting the conversation that followed. "Tell me about the pattern. When did this start, and what makes you think it's coordinated?" Walter's briefing was precise and comprehensive. 6 months ago, patrol frequency tripled in specific downtown areas. Always the same message: move along, clean up the streets. Stop bothering the business community. But the targeting was too precise for random harassment. Elderly veterans, disabled individuals, anyone whose appearance might discourage tourism or development, Maria added. Medical documentation shows injuries consistent with systematic abuse, not isolated incidents. Jerome emerged from his observation post near the windows, moving with the silent efficiency that had made him an effective scout sniper. Intelligence gathering suggests private funding and federal-level coordination. Equipment signatures include encrypted communications, professional surveillance gear, and tactical support beyond local police capabilities. Tommy's technical analysis was even more disturbing. Intercepted communications reference timeline pressures and approval deadlines. Someone's paying for specific results within specific timeframes. Seagal's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from his handler. The text was brief but alarming. Cover compromised. Multiple federal agencies requesting information about your current operation. Recommend immediate extraction. Problem? Walter asked, reading Seagal's expression with the expertise of someone who had spent decades evaluating threat levels. "My people are telling me to abort," Seagal said honestly. "Someone with serious resources is asking questions about my investigation." The silence that followed was broken by Maria's quiet voice. "And what are you telling them?" Before Seagal could answer, Jerome's urgent whisper cut through the conversation. Multiple vehicles approaching. Count 3 unmarked sedans, 2 patrol units, and what appears to be a surveillance van. Full tactical deployment. Through the modified mirrors, they could see officers establishing a perimeter around the warehouse while technicians deployed electronic equipment designed to detect communication signals and heat signatures. "They found us too fast," Tommy said, his technical mind immediately grasping the implications. "Either they're tracking our communications or they have intelligence assets we haven't identified." Walter's response was characteristically direct. "Doesn't matter how they found us. Question is whether we fight or run." Seagal studied the deployment pattern through Jerome's observation mirrors, his CIA training automatically analyzing tactical options and escape routes. The coordination was professional, suggesting federal involvement rather than local police harassment. "This isn't about homeless harassment anymore," he said quietly. "Someone's treating this like a national security investigation." Maria's medical bag contained more than bandages and medications. As she checked its contents, Seagal glimpsed items that suggested preparation for sustained conflict rather than simple emergency treatment. "Sam," Walter said, using the cover name but speaking with the authority of a military commander. "Time to decide if you're with us or just passing through. Because those badges outside aren't here to ask polite questions." The radio crackled. "With intercepted police communications. All units, maintain perimeter. Suspects considered armed and dangerous. Authorization granted for dynamic entry if necessary." Seagal realized his investigation had evolved into something far more dangerous than simple corruption documentation. Someone with significant resources, and federal connections was orchestrating a cover-up that included eliminating witnesses. Looking at the faces of these forgotten veterans, he made the decision that would define everything that followed. "I'm with you," he said simply. "Time to find out what they're really trying to hide." The emergency call came through Harborview Medical Center's trauma line at 10:47 p.m. Elderly homeless male found beaten unconscious behind Pike Place Market. Critical injuries, no identification. Seagal received the alert through the Veteran Network's emergency frequency while conducting surveillance on a suspected police harassment location 3 miles away. By the time he reached the hospital, Walter Kowalski had been stabilized but remained unconscious, his weathered face barely recognizable beneath bandages and medical equipment. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chun, spoke with the professional detachment required to deliver devastating news to people who had no resources to process it. Severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding that required emergency surgery, she explained to Seagal, who had identified himself as Walter's brother using identification documents that would pass casual inspection. Whoever did this knew exactly how to cause maximum damage without leaving immediately fatal injuries. Seagal studied Walter's chart with the clinical eye of someone who had seen similar injuries in combat zones and CIA operations. The pattern of trauma suggested professional interrogation techniques designed to extract information while maintaining plausible deniability. "Can I see him?" Seagal asked. "He's been asking for someone named Sam," Dr. Chin said. "Keeps repeating something about the big cleanup and coordinates to some kind of cache." The ICU was dimly lit, filled with the steady rhythm of machines maintaining lives that hung in delicate balance. Walter's eyes opened as Seagal approached, focusing with the effort of someone fighting through pain medication and neurological trauma. "Sam," Walter's voice was barely audible through the oxygen mask. "Had to tell you, they're not just clearing us out. Something bigger." Seagal leaned closer, his trained ear catching fragments of intelligence that Walter was struggling to communicate. "Take your time, brother. I'm here." "Millennium Development Corporation," Walter whispered, each word requiring enormous effort. Overheard Morrison talking to someone. 2 weeks until the vote. Council meeting about development approval. The name triggered recognition in Seagal's memory. Anthony Castellano's company, one of Seattle's most aggressive real estate developers with a reputation for acquiring properties through questionable methods. "They know I was documenting everything," Walter continued. "Photos, recordings hidden under the dumpster behind Pike Place. Grid coordinates. November 7/7. Walter's grip on Seagal's arm intensified with surprising strength. For someone so badly injured. "Deputy chief involved." Heard Morrison mention Brooks by name. Federal money flowing through police department. The implications were staggering. If Deputy Chief Raymond Brooks was coordinating with private developers to systematically clear homeless populations from target areas, the corruption reached far higher than street-level harassment. "They're planning something big for tomorrow night." Walter struggled to continue. "Complete clearance of downtown core." Morrison called it the final solution. Seagal's blood ran cold at the terminology. The phrase carried historical connotations that suggested someone was planning violence on a scale far beyond individual harassment incidents. That Walter's voice became even more urgent as his consciousness began fading. "The old veteran they beat last week. Marcus Thompson. They killed him, Sam. Made it look like natural causes. Drug overdose. But Marcus was clean, 15 years sober." Before Seagal could ask for more details, Walter's eyes closed as the combination of pain medication and exhaustion overwhelmed his determination to share critical intelligence. Movement in the hospital corridor caught Seagal's attention through the ICU window. 2 men in civilian clothes were approaching the nurse's station, flashing badges and asking questions. Their bearing and coordination suggested federal law enforcement rather than local police. Seagal activated his secure phone's emergency protocol, uploading everything Walter had told him to an encrypted server while simultaneously sending a coded message to his handler. "Package compromised. Federal interest confirmed. Immediate extraction recommended." As the plainclothes officers entered the ICU, Seagal slipped out through a service exit, but not before retrieving Walter's hidden cache. From the coordinates the veteran had provided, Hidden beneath a dumpster behind Pike Place Market, wrapped in waterproof plastic, was a collection of photographs, audio recordings, and documents that painted a picture of systematic corruption reaching the highest levels of city government. Point 1. Document fragment bore the Millennium Development Corporation letterhead and contained references to Phase 3 implementation and final area clearance. Another showed payment authorizations signed by someone with the initials RB. Almost certainly Deputy Chief Raymond Brooks. A.S. Seagal studied the evidence in the dim light of a parking garage. He realized Walter's beating hadn't been random retaliation. Someone knew the veteran was gathering evidence, and they had tried to eliminate him before he could share what he had discovered. The real conspiracy was about to be revealed, and Seagal was no longer investigating simple police harassment. He was uncovering a systematic campaign to clear specific areas of Seattle for private development, funded through federal law enforcement grants and coordinated at the highest levels of city government. Tomorrow night's final solution was approaching, and Walter's life hung in the balance as the only witness to murders disguised as natural causes. Dawn crept through the laundromat's grimy windows as Seagal spread Walter's evidence across a folding table, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows over documents that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Millennium Development Corporation's internal memos outlined a systematic campaign to clear prime real estate areas through coordinated law enforcement harassment. Payment schedules showed monthly transfers to numbered accounts, with bonus structures tied to area clearance metrics and population displacement targets. The timeline was aggressive: complete clearance of downtown areas before a crucial city council vote scheduled for next Tuesday, that a shadow passed the window for the third time in 20 minutes. Seagal's peripheral vision caught the same dark sedan, moving too slowly for normal traffic patterns. His counter-surveillance instincts, honed by decades of CIA operations, immediately recognized a coordinated tail point. Two men in casual clothing positioned themselves across the street, their posture and communication patterns marking them as law enforcement despite their civilian appearance. Professional telephoto cameras suggested federal resources rather than local police surveillance. Seagal gathered the evidence quickly, sealing it in a waterproof pouch hidden inside his tattered jacket. The laundromat's rear exit led to an alley system that connected to Pike Place Market's delivery areas. Perfect terrain for someone who understood urban evasion techniques. The pursuit began the moment he stepped outside. Four unmarked vehicles coordinated through encrypted radio communications, establishing a mobile perimeter that demonstrated federal-level training and resources. This wasn't local police harassment anymore. Moving through Pike Place Market's crowded vendor stalls, Seagal used civilian cover and multiple exit points to identify the full scope of the surveillance operation. At least 6 officers on foot, coordinated overwatch positions, and electronic surveillance equipment that could track movement patterns and communication signals. His secure phone vibrated with an urgent message: federal agencies requesting information about current operation. Multiple departments interested. Recommend immediate extraction and debrief. The message confirmed his worst suspicions. Someone with federal connections was orchestrating the cover-up, using legitimate law enforcement resources to protect a private development scheme that involved systematic abuse of homeless veterans. Descending into Seattle's underground tunnel system near Pioneer Square, Seagal implemented escape protocols that dated back to his CIA training. The tunnels provided concealment from aerial surveillance while connecting to sewer systems that offered multiple extraction points. Behind him, radio chatter indicated his pursuers were deploying additional resources. Subject has entered underground areas, requesting K-9 units and thermal imaging equipment. Treat as armed and dangerous. Emerging from a drainage outlet near Elliott Bay, Seagal realized the manhunt had escalated beyond anything justified by investigating police misconduct. Someone was treating his presence as a national security threat, suggesting the corruption involved federal agencies and resources. In the distance, Maria Santos waited beside a stolen medical van, her Army medic training having taught her extraction procedures that complemented his CIA background. The veteran network had become his only reliable allies in a city where federal resources were being used to protect private profits. "They found us too fast," Maria said as he climbed into the passenger seat. Someone's tracking our communications or has intelligence assets we haven't identified. The real hunt was just beginning. The subbasement of the old Seattle Underground provided perfect concealment for examining Walter's evidence cache, but the documents revealed a conspiracy that reached far beyond simple police corruption. By flashlight, Seagal studied internal Millennium Development memos that outlined a systematic campaign to clear homeless populations from prime development areas. Anthony Castellano's signature appeared on payment authorizations totaling over $2 million, distributed through numbered accounts to specific police officers with performance bonuses tied to area clearance success rates. The most damning document showed a timeline coordinated with city council voting schedules. Urban renewal phase 3-inch was scheduled to begin tomorrow night, with complete clearance of targeted areas before Tuesday's development approval vote. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, designed to obscure the human cost of what amounted to systematic persecution. Internal communications revealed that Deputy Chief Raymond Brooks had gambling debts exceeding $200,000, making him vulnerable to Castellano's influence. Monthly payments of $50,000 had been flowing to Brooks' offshore accounts for 8 months, coinciding with the escalation in homeless harassment. A handwritten note in Walter's careful script identified the smoking gun. Witnessed. Meeting between Castellano representative and Brooks, Harbor Island Warehouse, October 15th. Discussed elimination of problem witnesses and acceleration of timeline due to federal oversight concerns. The note's margin contained GPS coordinates and a sketched map showing surveillance positions Walter had used to document the meeting. The old veteran's military training had served him well. His intelligence gathering was professional quality, complete with backup documentation and verification procedures. Seagal's secure phone rang with an encrypted call from his handler. Steven, multiple federal agencies are asking questions about your current operation. FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security all claim jurisdiction concerns. Someone's treating this like terrorism. Because someone's using federal law enforcement resources to protect private development schemes, Seagal replied. The corruption reaches federal levels. That's what we're afraid of. Your cover's blown, and we're getting pressure to recall you immediately. Before Seagal could respond, footsteps echoed in the tunnels above. Heavy boots, coordinated movement patterns, and the metallic sounds of tactical equipment being deployed. Someone had tracked him to the underground location despite his counter-surveillance measures. Flashlight beams probed the tunnel entrances, while radio chatter indicated a full tactical deployment. All units, maintain perimeter. Subject considered armed and extremely dangerous. Authorization granted for lethal force if resistance encountered. The language was military rather than civilian law enforcement, suggesting federal resources were being deployed for what should have been a simple investigation of local police misconduct. Seagal destroyed his phone and moved deeper into the tunnel system, using knowledge of Seattle's infrastructure that dated back to his CIA training. The underground maze connected to storm drains and utility tunnels that offered multiple escape routes. But his pursuers had resources and coordination that suggested federal involvement. Emergency radio chatter revealed the scale of the response. All available units to Pioneer Square Underground. Requesting K-9 units, thermal imaging, and perimeter establishment. Treat as high-value target apprehension. 20 officers for 1 investigator suggested someone was desperate to prevent Walter's evidence from reaching federal prosecutors who weren't part of Castellano's influence network. AS search teams converged on his last known position. Seagal realized his investigation had triggered a federal cover-up designed to protect corruption that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. Someone with access to terrorism response resources was using them to eliminate witnesses to systematic abuse of American veterans. The evidence cache became his most valuable asset and greatest liability. Walter's documentation could expose the entire conspiracy, but only if it reached authorities who weren't compromised by Castellano's money and influence. Lieutenant Kellerman's office at Seattle Police Headquarters buzzed with activity as Deputy Chief Raymond Brooks reviewed surveillance photographs spread across the conference table. Morrison and Vance waited at attention, their usual swagger replaced by nervous awareness that their operation had attracted unwanted federal attention. "Gentlemen," Brooks began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "We have a serious problem. The vagrant you've been tracking isn't some homeless drifter with military training." He slid a federal identification photograph across the table. "This is Steven Seagal, former CIA operative, current private investigator specializing in corruption cases. He's been documenting your activities for 3 weeks." Morrison's face went pale as he recognized implications that extended far beyond simple harassment charges. "Sir, we had no idea. He was just another bum causing problems." "That bum has evidence that could destroy all of us," Brooks snapped. "Audio recordings, photographs, documentation of payments and coordination. Everything we've worked for is compromised." Vance's nervous energy manifested in fidgeting that spoke to his inexperience with operations of this scale. "What about the federal interest? Why are FBI and Homeland Security asking questions?" Brooks' expression revealed the calculating corruption that had made him valuable to Castellano's organization. "Because our employer has contacts throughout federal law enforcement. When local operations attract attention, federal resources can be redirected to protect national security interests." The explanation was carefully crafted to avoid explicit admission of treason, but its meaning was clear. Castellano's influence extended to federal agencies, allowing him to use terrorism response protocols to eliminate threats to his development schemes. "Urban renewal isn't just about clearing homeless populations," Brooks continued. "It's about demonstrating that private sector efficiency can solve problems that government agencies can't handle. Federal contracts worth hundreds of millions depend on successful implementation." Kellerman's phone rang with an encrypted call from Castellano himself. The conversation was brief, professional, designed to avoid creating evidence while communicating. "Urgent instructions. Phase 3 begins tonight," Brooks announced after ending the call. "Complete clearance of all target areas, elimination of witness problems, and preparation for Tuesday's council vote. No more harassment. This is direct action." Morrison's understanding of the implications was immediate and terrifying. "Sir, are you authorizing lethal force against American citizens?" "I'm authorizing whatever measures are necessary to protect a multi-billion-dollar development project that will create thousands of jobs and revitalize downtown Seattle," Brooks replied with bureaucratic precision. "Individual casualties are regrettable but acceptable in service of the greater good." The room fell silent as the officers processed the transformation of their corruption from simple harassment to something approaching domestic terrorism. Federal resources, military tactics, and elimination of witnesses represented an escalation that violated every oath they had sworn to uphold. Vance's voice was barely audible. "What about our families? Our careers? If this goes wrong, it won't go wrong," Brooks interrupted with false confidence. "Because failure isn't an option. Castellano has enough evidence of our involvement to destroy us all if we don't complete the mission. We're past the point of no return." The deputy chief activated a secure communication system that connected to federal coordination centers. "All units, initiate Phase 3 protocols. Target elimination authorized. Rules of engagement. No witnesses, no evidence, no survivors." As the room cleared, Morrison and Vance exchanged glances that revealed their growing understanding that they had become expendable assets in a conspiracy that extended far beyond their comprehension. Brooks remained behind, studying intelligence reports that showed Seagal's location and the veteran network's defensive preparations. Tonight's operation would determine whether decades of corruption could be protected through systematic elimination of everyone who threatened to expose it. The citywide manhunt was about to become something far more deadly to Dr. Janet Mitchell's evening rounds at Sacred Heart Shelter revealed disturbing patterns that her medical training immediately recognized as systematic rather than random. In 6 hours, she had treated 14 homeless individuals with injuries consistent with coordinated assault rather than isolated incidents of violence or accident. Jerome Washington arrived through the shelter's rear entrance, moving with the tactical awareness that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. His reconnaissance of police movements throughout downtown Seattle painted a picture of coordinated deployment that resembled military operations more than civilian law enforcement. "They're not patrolling anymore," Jerome reported to the assembled veterans in the shelter's basement meeting room. full tactical deployment, coordinated perimeters, and federal resources. This is urban warfare preparation. Maria Santos reviewed her medical documentation while Tommy Brennan monitored encrypted police communications through modified radio equipment. The pattern was unmistakable. Systematic elimination of witnesses was beginning under cover of routine. Police operations. 14 casualties in 6 hours, Dr. Mitchell reported. All victims report being approached by officers demanding information about the vagrant with military training. Those who claimed ignorance were beaten. Those who admitted contact were beaten worse. Seagal's voice crackled through the emergency radio network from his concealed position in an abandoned brewery south of downtown. The evidence Walter gathered proves federal involvement. Someone's using terrorism response protocols to protect private development schemes. The implications were staggering. Federal law enforcement resources designed to protect national security were being redirected to eliminate American veterans whose only crime was witnessing corruption. Dr. Mitchell's medical oath required her to document and report systematic violence, but her growing alliance with the Veteran Network had taught her that official channels were compromised. I've been maintaining detailed records of abuse patterns for months. Medical evidence that corroborates everything Walter documented. Tommy's technical analysis revealed electronic surveillance capabilities that exceeded local police resources. They're tracking communication signals, monitoring movement patterns, and coordinating through encrypted federal networks. Someone with serious clearance is orchestrating this. Jerome's military experience immediately grasped the tactical situation. We're facing a coordinated elimination operation disguised as law enforcement. Standard counterinsurgency tactics: identify, isolate, and eliminate resistance networks. Seagal's secure transmission provided critical intelligence. Castellano's meeting with federal contacts tomorrow morning. If we can intercept communications or gather evidence of federal involvement, we can expose the entire conspiracy. Dr. Mitchell realized her documentation represented more than medical records. It was evidence of systematic human rights violations that could trigger federal prosecution if it reached uncorrupted authorities. The shelter has secure communication capabilities, she offered. Federal grant requirements included emergency broadcast systems that connect directly to FBI field offices. The irony was perfect. Federal funding designed to protect vulnerable populations could be used to expose federal corruption that targeted those same people. Maria's radio crackled with urgent traffic from their observation posts throughout the city. Multiple police units converging on shelter location. Count 8 vehicles, estimated 30 officers, tactical equipment deployment. Through the basement windows, they could see floodlights illuminating the building's perimeter while amplified. Voices demanded surrender of terrorist suspects hiding inside a religious facility. Seagal's voice cut through the radio static with tactical precision. All units, implement defensive protocols. They're not coming to arrest anyone, they're coming to eliminate witnesses. Dr. Mitchell looked around the basement filled with homeless veterans who had served their country with honor, now facing systematic persecution by the institutions they had sworn to defend. How many federal crimes are we witnessing? She asked. Quietly. All of them. Jerome replied with grim accuracy. Conspiracy, civil rights violations, terrorism, treason. Someone's gambling that federal resources can cover up federal crimes. Outside, Deputy Chief Brooks' voice echoed through a bullhorn. This is your final warning. Send out the terrorist suspects, or we're coming in with everything we've got. The siege was about to begin. The trap had been set with the precision of a federal operation. Dr. Mitchell drove the medical van through downtown Seattle while Seagal, disguised as a patient under blankets and medical equipment, reviewed the evidence. That could expose the entire conspiracy. The meeting with Mayor Hendricks was scheduled for 8:30 p.m. in City Hall's basement conference room, a location chosen for privacy and multiple exit routes. Donald Reeves had arranged everything through back channels, expressing the mayor's genuine shock at learning the extent of police corruption and federal involvement. The basement location would allow for discreet evidence transfer while maintaining operational security that had kept Seagal alive for 3 weeks of investigation. They approached City Hall. Seagal's trained eye caught details that triggered immediate alarm. Too many vehicles for normal evening operations, coordinated positioning that suggested perimeter establishment, and electronic equipment that exceeded standard government security measures. "Something's wrong," he told Dr. Mitchell through the medical van's intercom. Police deployment patterns suggest this meeting was compromised. Mayor Patricia Hendricks waited in conference room B7 with Reeves, both showing the stress of officials who had discovered that their own administration was penetrated by corruption reaching federal levels. The evidence Seagal presented, Walters, cash, Dr. Mitchell's medical documentation, and intercepted communications, painted a picture of systematic abuse that violated every principle of democratic governance. "Jesus Christ," the mayor whispered, reviewing photographs of beaten veterans and payment schedules linking her deputy chief to private development interests. "How long has this been happening under my administration?" "At least 8 months," Seagal replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades investigating government corruption. "But the federal involvement suggests this operation has backing from agencies with national security clearance." The conversation was interrupted by amplified voices echoing through City Hall's corridors. Morrison's familiar aggression carried through the building's PA system. "Steven Seagal, this is Seattle Police. You are surrounded. Surrender immediately for questioning regarding terrorist activities." Mayor Hendricks' face went pale as she realized the implications. "They're treating this like a terrorism investigation in my own building." Reeves moved to the conference room's secure phone, but Seagal stopped him with a gesture that carried decades of survival instincts. "Don't use official communication. Someone in your office has been feeding information to Castellano's people." The truth hit Mayor Hendricks like physical impact. Her trusted chief of staff, the man who had arranged this meeting and coordinated her anti-corruption efforts, had been reporting to the conspirators for months. "Donald?" she asked, her voice carrying the betrayal of someone discovering that her closest advisor had been compromised. Reeves' expression shifted from concerned public servant to calculating operative as SWAT officers entered the basement level. "I'm sorry, Patricia. My gambling debts and personal complications made cooperation with Castellano a necessity rather than a choice." Deputy Chief Brooks appeared in the doorway with armed officers, his corrupt authority now backed by federal resources and military equipment. "Mr. Seagal, you're under arrest for domestic terrorism, conspiracy against the United States, and threatening public officials." The charges were fabricated but carried the weight of federal prosecution that could eliminate Seagal without trial if he resisted arrest. Mayor Hendricks realized she was witnessing a coup designed to protect private development interests through systematic elimination of government oversight. Seagal overturned the conference table, creating temporary cover while assessing tactical options in the confined space. The basement offered limited escape routes, but his aikido training and knowledge of building layouts provided advantages that his pursuers couldn't anticipate. As SWAT officers advanced with military precision, he disappeared into City Hall's maintenance areas, beginning a running battle that would test every skill acquired through decades of CIA operations and martial arts mastery. The basement corridors of City Hall became a maze of tactical engagement as Seagal implemented escape protocols honed by decades of CIA fieldwork. His aikido training adapted perfectly to the confined space, using walls, door frames, and low ceilings to redirect his pursuers' aggression while minimizing lethal force. SWAT officers equipped with military-grade weapons found their advantages, neutralized by an opponent who understood how to use architectural features as weapons. Seagal's movements flowed like water, redirecting momentum and causing heavily armed officers to collide with concrete walls and steel door frames. "Target is highly trained in close-quarters combat," came the radio chatter as officers attempted to coordinate in corridors designed for maintenance rather than tactical operations. Standard containment protocols ineffective. The chase moved through storage areas filled with city records and emergency supplies, where Seagal used his environment creatively. Fire extinguishers became projectiles, emergency lighting created temporary blindness, and narrow passages forced his pursuers into single-file advancement that negated their numerical advantage. Deputy Chief Brooks coordinated the operation from the main floor, his radio communications revealing the desperation of someone whose corruption was being exposed in real time. "All units, subject must not escape alive. Federal authorization for lethal force is confirmed. Seagal's path led through the buildings. Mechanical systems, where his knowledge of urban infrastructure provided escape routes that his military-trained pursuers couldn't anticipate. Heating ducts, electrical conduits, and maintenance tunnels created a three-dimensional battlefield where conventional tactics failed, i.e. the parking garage. Police cruisers blocked all exits, while officers established overlapping fields of fire. Designed to prevent vehicular escape, Seagal responded by using a fire axe to disable engine blocks and creating smoke cover through the building's sprinkler system activation. The radio chatter revealed the true scope of the operation: federal oversight requesting immediate termination of suspect. Multiple agencies confirming terrorist designation requires elimination rather than capture. Dr. Mitchell's medical van provided temporary extraction, but police helicopters and coordinated ground units suggested resources that exceeded local law enforcement capabilities. Someone with federal authority was treating Seagal's investigation as a national security threat requiring military-level response. "They're not trying to arrest you," Dr. Mitchell observed as they evaded pursuit through Seattle's industrial district. Federal resources don't get deployed for local corruption cases. Seagal's secure phone had been destroyed during the City Hall battle, cutting his communication with CIA handlers who might provide federal protection. The isolation was complete. He was facing federal resources without federal support, investigating corruption that reached agencies designed to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. Police radio intercepts revealed the next phase. Subject vehicle identified. All units converge on industrial sector. Federal authority confirms termination authorization if suspect resists. The manhunt had escalated beyond any justification for investigating police misconduct. Someone was using terrorism response protocols to eliminate an American citizen whose only crime was documenting systematic abuse of homeless veterans. As they reached the abandoned brewery that served as the veteran network's safe house, Seagal realized the true scope of the conspiracy. Federal agencies designed to protect national security were being used to protect private development interests, representing a level of corruption that threatened democratic institutions themselves. "How many federal crimes are we witnessing?" Dr. Mitchell asked as police helicopters circled overhead. "All of them," Seagal replied with grim accuracy. "Conspiracy, civil rights violations, abuse of federal resources, domestic terrorism, prosecution of American citizens. Someone's betting that federal power can cover up federal corruption." Radio chatter confirmed their worst fears. Perimeter established. Federal authority confirms no survivors protocol. Eliminate all witnesses to protect ongoing national security operations. The siege was about to begin, and everyone inside had become expendable. Anthony Castellano's penthouse office overlooked Seattle's waterfront from the 42nd floor of Millennium Tower, where he reviewed news reports describing Steven Seagal as a domestic terrorist threatening federal law enforcement operations. The fabricated narrative was perfect. Corruption investigation transformed into national security crisis through careful manipulation of federal resources. Deputy Chief Brooks arrived at 11:30 p.m., his uniform replaced by civilian clothes that suggested someone trying to distance himself from official responsibility. The meeting was necessary but dangerous, as FBI surveillance of terrorism investigations could inadvertently document the very corruption they were trying to conceal. "The situation is contained," Brooks reported, his voice carrying the strain of someone managing multiple federal agencies while coordinating systematic elimination of witnesses. Seagal's isolated, his communication with CIA handlers is severed, and Mayor Hendricks is under protective custody pending terrorism investigation. Castellano's satisfaction was tempered by awareness that federal involvement created new vulnerabilities. "What about the homeless veterans? They have evidence that could destroy everything we've built." "Handled," Brooks replied with bureaucratic precision. Federal terrorism protocols allow for elimination of co-conspirators who pose ongoing threats to national security. The veterans will be classified as terrorist sympathizers. The conversation was interrupted by encrypted communication from federal coordinators confirming that Steven Seagal had been located at the Veteran Network's safe house. Thermal imaging showed multiple individuals inside the building, all designated as terrorist suspects requiring immediate elimination. There's one complication, Brooks admitted reluctantly. Mayor Hendricks' daughter was kidnapped this afternoon by unknown subjects. Federal investigation is treating it as terrorism-related, but we know it's designed to ensure the mayor's cooperation. Castellano's expression revealed the calculating ruthlessness that had built his real estate empire through systematic elimination of obstacles. Sometimes insurance policies become necessary when federal resources aren't sufficient to guarantee compliance. Karen Hendricks, 16 years old and honor student at Seattle Prep, had been taken during her walk home from volleyball practice. The kidnapping was professional, coordinated, designed to ensure that her mother wouldn't expose federal corruption even if she survived the terrorism investigation. Where is she being held? Brooks asked, his corrupt authority still carrying vestiges of law enforcement training that recognized kidnapping as a federal crime. Harbor Island Warehouse, maximum security, federal-level protection, Castellano replied. Insurance against unexpected complications in our timeline. Tuesdays. City Council vote cannot be delayed or compromised. The irony was perfect. Federal resources designed to protect kidnapping victims were being used to maintain custody of a kidnapped victim whose mother's cooperation was essential to protecting federal corruption. Brooks' radio crackled with urgent communication from the veterans' safe house siege. All units in position. Federal authority confirms termination protocol. No survivors, no witnesses, no evidence. Castellano activated a secure video feed showing the brewery surrounded by federal tactical teams equipped with military weapons and authorization to use lethal force against American veterans whose only crime was witnessing systematic abuse. Gentlemen, Castellano said with corporate satisfaction, in 6 hours we will have eliminated every witness to our operations, secured federal protection for our development projects, and demonstrated that private sector efficiency can solve problems that government agencies cannot handle. The federal contracts resulting from successful urban renewal implementation would be worth hundreds of millions, establishing Castellano's company as the premier private security contractor for domestic operations requiring systematic population control. What about Seagal? Brooks asked. CIA training makes him extremely dangerous even when isolated. Federal resources include military-grade weapons, coordinated tactical support, and authorization for lethal force, Castellano replied. One man against the combined power of multiple federal agencies. The outcome is predetermined. Through the penthouse windows, they could see police helicopters circling the industrial district where America's most decorated action hero was about to face the full weight of corrupted federal power in defense of forgotten veterans who had already sacrificed everything for their country. The final battle was about to begin. With federal agencies betting that systematic elimination of witnesses could protect corruption that threatened democratic institutions themselves. The rescue mission began at 2:45 a.m. with Steven Seagal's infiltration of the Harbor Island warehouse. Through climbing techniques that combined CIA training with martial arts discipline. The facility was isolated, heavily guarded, and equipped with security systems that suggested federal-level protection for what should have been a simple kidnapping operation. 6 armed guards patrolled the perimeter, while sophisticated surveillance equipment monitored approaches from land and water. The coordination was professional, military precise, suggesting that Castellano's private security team included former federal agents with access to government resources. Seagal's entry through the skylight required skills acquired through decades of covert operations, rappelling through industrial lighting while avoiding motion sensors and pressure plates designed to detect unauthorized intrusion. The warehouse interior revealed a temporary holding facility that had been constructed with federal prison specifications. Karen Hendricks, Mayor Hendricks' 16-year-old daughter, was confined in a makeshift cell equipped with basic necessities but designed for psychological pressure rather than physical abuse. Her captors understood that cooperation from her mother required proof of Karen's continued well-being rather than evidence of torture. Are you here to help? Karen whispered as Seagal disabled the electronic lock using techniques that combined CIA training with knowledge of federal security systems. I'm here to get you home, Seagal replied, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had spent decades rescuing people from situations where failure meant death. The extraction required silence and precision as guards continued their patrols while federal surveillance equipment monitored communication frequencies and movement patterns. Seagal's aikido training provided advantages in confined spaces, allowing him to disable security personnel without creating noise that would alert the perimeter team. The escape route led through the warehouse's loading dock area, where a stolen security vehicle provided transportation to the mainland. Karen's courage impressed Seagal. She followed instructions precisely, moved silently when required, and showed no panic despite understanding that her life depended on perfect execution of escape protocols. "My mom hired you, didn't she?" Karen asked as they reached the vehicle. She said she was trying to help homeless veterans, but someone was stopping her. "Your mother's trying to do the right thing," Seagal confirmed. "Sometimes that requires help from people who understand how to fight corruption." The drive to the predetermined safe house felt like victory. Evidence secured, victim rescued, conspiracy exposed. Dr. Mitchell waited at the abandoned church in Georgetown with medical supplies and communication equipment that would allow Mayor Hendricks to expose federal corruption through media contacts and uncorrupted federal agencies. The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional but brief, as tactical requirements demanded immediate action to prevent retaliation. Mayor Hendricks reviewed Seagal's evidence while Dr. Mitchell documented Karen's kidnapping ordeal, creating comprehensive proof of federal crimes that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. "We can hold a press conference at dawn," Mayor Hendricks said, her voice carrying the determination of someone who had discovered that federal resources were being used to protect private interests. Federal agencies can't suppress evidence of their own corruption when it's broadcast nationally. The moment felt like triumph, justice about to be served, corruption about to be exposed, innocent victims about to be protected. Karen was safe, the evidence was comprehensive, and federal agencies would face accountability for systematic abuse of their authority. Then police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with mechanical inevitability. Deputy Chief Brooks' voice echoed through a megaphone outside the church. "Steven Seagal, you are surrounded. You have 30 seconds to release the hostages and surrender, or we will use deadly force." The horrifying realization hit everyone simultaneously. Brooks had transformed the rescue into a kidnapping, the evidence gathering into terrorism, the protection of innocents into hostage-taking. SWAT teams were positioning with orders to eliminate everyone inside, including the mayor and her daughter. Federal resources designed to protect American citizens were about to be used to murder American citizens whose only crime was witnessing federal corruption. The siege was about to begin, and everyone inside had become expendable in service of protecting private development interests through systematic elimination of government oversight. The abandoned Sacred Heart Church had become a fortress of the forgotten as word spread through Seattle's veteran network that their brothers were making their final stand. By 3:15 a.m., 30 homeless veterans had gathered inside the Gothic structure, choosing to fight alongside Steven Seagal rather than abandon a fellow warrior to face corruption alone. Walter Kowalski arrived despite his critical injuries, having checked himself out of Harborview Medical Center against medical advice. His weathered face showed the determination of someone who understood that some battles were worth dying for, especially when the enemy represented everything he had spent his life opposing. "Brother," Walter said to Seagal, gripping his arm with surprising strength, "we've been retreating all our lives. Time to advance." The church's stone walls provided natural fortification against small arms fire, while the bell tower offered commanding overwatch of surrounding approaches. Maria Santos established a field hospital in the sacristy, organizing medical supplies with the efficiency that had made her an effective Army combat medic in 3 war zones. Tommy Brennan's demolitions expertise transformed cleaning supplies found in the church basement into improvised explosive devices positioned at strategic choke points. His nervous energy became focused precision as he calculated blast patterns and debris fields that would channel attackers into predetermined kill zones. Jerome Washington climbed to the bell tower with a scoped rifle liberated from corrupt officers. During earlier confrontations, his Marine Corps Scout sniper training remained sharp despite years of homelessness, and his elevated position provided observation of police deployment patterns that revealed federal coordination. Count 8 SWAT vehicles, 2 armored personnel carriers, and what appears to be a federal command post. Jerome reported through the emergency radio network. This isn't police response anymore. This is military assault on American soil. Dr. Mitchell worked alongside Maria to prepare for casualties while Mayor Hendricks used her secure phone to contact federal agencies that weren't compromised by Castellano's influence. The evidence of systematic corruption needed to reach honest investigators before everyone who witnessed it was eliminated. Seagal moved through the church assessing defensive positions, while his aikido training automatically calculated angles of attack and fields of fire. The Gothic architecture provided advantages that modern tactical teams wouldn't anticipate: stone pillars that could stop rifle bullets, elevated positions that negated numerical superiority, and narrow passages that forced attackers into single file. Advancement. These walls have been here for over a century, he told the assembled veterans. They've seen Seattle grow from frontier town to modern city. Tonight, they're going to see American veterans defend the principles that built this country. Karen Hendricks sat with her mother in the relative safety of the altar area, her 16-year-old mind processing the reality that federal agents were preparing to kill American citizens to protect private development profits. The corruption was so extensive that constitutional protections had become meaningless. Outside, floodlights illuminated the church while amplified voices demanded surrender. "You have 2 minutes to send out the hostages, or we're coming in with everything we've got." Brooks announced through military-grade speakers that Walter's response carried through the church with the authority of someone who had faced worse odds. "In Vietnamese jungles, we've been surrounded before, brothers. The difference is, this time we're fighting for home." The siege was about to begin, and 30 forgotten veterans were prepared to remind America what warriors looked like when they stopped retreating and started advancing at 3:30 a.m. Deputy Chief Brooks gave the order that transformed Seattle Police Department officers into domestic terrorists. All units, commence dynamic entry. Federal authority confirms no survivors protocol. The first assault wave crashed against the church like a military invasion, with SWAT officers advancing through the main entrance while others rappelled through stained glass windows from the roof. Flashbang grenades exploded throughout the Gothic interior, filling the sacred space with smoke and chaos designed to disorient defenders. Maria Santos had anticipated the psychological warfare tactics, distributing dampened cloth for breathing protection, while Tommy Brennan's improvised explosive devices channeled the attackers into predetermined kill zones. The first casualties were federal agents who discovered that homeless veterans retained the tactical discipline that had kept them alive in foreign wars. Jerome Washington's sniper position in the Bell Tower provided devastating overwatch as corrupt officers exposed themselves while advancing through the church grounds. His Marine Corps precision eliminated 3 federal agents before they realized they were facing a decorated marksman whose skills remained sharp despite years of society's neglect. Bravo 2, Alpha 7. Jerome's voice crackled through the emergency radio. "Count 8 hostiles down. Remaining forces taking cover behind vehicles." They didn't expect organized resistance. Seagal moved through the chaos with supernatural calm, his aikido mastery adapting to the confined space between stone pillars and wooden pews. Federal agents equipped with military weapons found their advantages neutralized by someone who understood how to use architectural features as weapons and leverage points. The church's narrow aisles became death traps for heavily armed officers, whose training emphasized overwhelming firepower rather than precision combat. Seagal's techniques redirected their momentum, causing them to crash into stone walls and Gothic fixtures while he remained fluid, untouchable, deadly. Walter Kowalski, despite his critical injuries, coordinated the veterans' defense with the tactical awareness that had made him an effective infantry sergeant in Vietnamese jungles. His quiet commands positioned defenders at choke points while maintaining communication through hand signals that didn't require radio equipment. "Tommy, bring down that section of ceiling," Walter ordered as federal agents attempted to establish a stronghold near the altar. "Maria, we need covering fire while wounded are extracted to the basement." The improvised explosive device collapsed part of the church's interior structure, creating debris fields that blocked federal advancement while providing additional cover for the defenders. Tommy's demolitions expertise, honed by years of disarming roadside bombs in Iraq, proved devastatingly effective against domestic enemies. Dr. Mitchell's medical station became a rallying point where wounded veterans received professional treatment while maintaining their positions in the defensive perimeter. Her civilian status didn't prevent her from understanding that medical ethics required protecting patients from systematic government persecution. The second assault wave included tear gas and military-grade weapons that violated every protocol. For domestic law enforcement operations, federal agents were treating American veterans like foreign combatants, using tactics designed for overseas warfare against citizens whose only crime was witnessing corruption. Mayor Hendricks live-streamed the battle through social media platforms, showing the world that decorated American veterans were being attacked by their own government. The footage revealed federal agents using military weapons against elderly homeless individuals in a house of worship. "This is Mayor Patricia Hendricks," she announced to her growing online audience. "Federal agents are attempting to murder American veterans who witnessed systematic corruption. This is not law enforcement. This is domestic terrorism." The first assault wave retreated after taking unprecedented casualties, leaving behind weapons and equipment that the veterans quickly redistributed. Brooks' radio chatter revealed mounting desperation as his forces faced organized resistance from people he had considered disposable. Outside, news helicopters arrived to broadcast the siege live to the nation, showing America that they're forgotten. Heroes had finally stopped retreating and started fighting back. Dawn broke over Seattle as the siege entered its fourth hour, with news helicopters broadcasting live footage of federal agents using military tactics against American veterans in a Gothic church. The optics were devastating for anyone trying to justify the operation as legitimate law enforcement. Social media exploded with support for the defenders as Mayor Hendricks' livestream reached millions of viewers who watched decorated veterans making their final stand against systematic government persecution. Hashtag Veterans Under Siege and hashtag Sacred Heart Stand trending worldwide as America witnessed its forgotten heroes fighting for dignity and justice. Inside the church, the second federal assault began with military precision that violated every domestic law. Enforcement protocol. Armored personnel carriers positioned for direct fire support, while SWAT teams advanced behind ballistic shields designed for overseas combat operations rather than civilian policing. Seagal's aikido mastery reached its full expression in the close-quarters combat that followed. Stone pillars and wooden pews became extensions of his technique as he flowed through the chaos like water finding its path. Federal agents discovered that their military equipment was useless against someone who turned their own force against them. The church's architecture provided perfect terrain for defensive operations, with elevated positions that negated numerical superiority and narrow passages that forced attackers into single-file advancement. Gothic design features that had inspired centuries of worshippers now channeled federal aggression into predetermined kill zones. Jerome Washington's sniper position commanded the entire battlefield, his Marine Corps training adapted to urban warfare against domestic enemies. Each shot was precisely placed, eliminating threats while conserving ammunition that couldn't be resupplied during the siege. Alpha 7, Bravo 2, his calm voice reported through the radio network. Federal command post established behind armored vehicles. Count 12 hostiles down. Remaining forces requesting additional tactical support. Tommy Brennan's demolitions expertise created a three-dimensional battlefield where traditional tactics failed completely. Controlled explosions brought down ceiling sections that blocked federal advancement while creating debris fields that provided additional defensive positions. Maria Santos maintained her field hospital while directing covering fire that demonstrated why Army combat medics were among the most respected soldiers in any unit. Her medical oath required protecting patients, even when those patients were fighting federal agents who had abandoned their own oaths. Walter Kowalski's tactical coordination transformed 30 homeless veterans into an effective military unit, whose combined experience represented decades of combat operations in multiple theaters. His quiet commands positioned defenders where their individual skills could maximum impact against numerically superior forces. Brothers, Walter's voice carried through the stone sanctuary. We've been forgotten by the country we served, abandoned by the institutions we protected, persecuted by the agencies we supported. Today, we remind America what warriors look like. when they stop retreating. Dr. Mitchell documented the battle through medical reports that detailed systematic government persecution of vulnerable populations. Her civilian perspective provided crucial testimony about federal crimes that reached the highest levels of law enforcement agencies. The livestream revealed federal agents using tactics designed for foreign warfare against elderly American citizens in a house of worship. International observers noted similarities to authoritarian crackdowns that the United States had condemned when they occurred in other countries. Brooks Radio Communications revealed mounting pressure from federal coordinators who realized the siege was becoming a public relations disaster that exposed systematic corruption. All units, accelerate timeline. Federal oversight demanding immediate resolution regardless of casualties. Outside, honest police officers began arriving as news of the siege spread through law enforcement communities. Many refused orders to participate in what appeared to be systematic persecution of American veterans by federal agencies that had abandoned their constitutional responsibilities. The tide was beginning to turn as America watched its forgotten heroes make their stand against corruption that threatened democratic institutions themselves. Steven Seagal's escape from Sacred Heart Church required every skill acquired through decades of CIA operations and martial arts mastery. While the veterans maintained their heroic defense, he used the tunnel system beneath the Gothic structure to reach downtown Seattle, where Anthony Castellano waited in his penthouse office, confident that federal resources would eliminate all witnesses to his systematic corruption. The 42-story Millennium Tower represented everything wrong with unchecked capitalism. Luxury condominiums built through systematic displacement of vulnerable populations, funded by corruption that reached federal agencies. Protected by law enforcement resources meant to serve public rather than private interests, Seagal's infiltration began with construction scaffolding and window washing equipment that provided access to the building's exterior. His climbing skills, honed by years of covert operations, allowed him to bypass security systems designed to stop conventional attacks rather than someone with CIA training and aikido discipline. The penthouse office occupied the entire top floor, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of Seattle while creating a glass prison for anyone trapped inside. Castellano had prepared the space as his final redoubt, equipped with hidden weapons and reinforced barriers, designed to prevent escape. "Mr. Seagal," Castellano said as the elevator doors opened to reveal his unexpected visitor. "I've been expecting you. Federal agencies assured me you wouldn't survive the siege, but I always planned for contingencies." The office was a monument to greed disguised as success. Scale models of proposed developments that would displace thousands of homeless individuals, photographs of politicians and federal agents whose corruption had been purchased with systematic bribes, awards from business organizations that celebrated profit over human dignity. "Anthony Castellano," Seagal replied with the calm authority of someone who had spent decades confronting evil in its various forms. "You're under citizens arrest for conspiracy, civil rights violations, bribery of federal officials, and terrorism against American veterans." Castellano's laugh revealed the arrogance of someone who believed wealth and federal protection made him untouchable. "Citizens arrest? Mr. Seagal, I own federal agencies. Your CIA handlers have been ordered to disavow your operations. You're completely alone." The confrontation began when Castellano activated hidden weapons systems built into his office furniture, steel barriers designed to trap intruders, while automated defense systems eliminated threats to his personal safety. The penthouse became a high-tech death trap where corporate paranoia met federal resources. Seagal's aikido training adapted immediately to the environment, using marble conference tables and steel fixtures as weapons while avoiding automated systems designed to kill anyone who threatened Castellano's empire. His movements flowed like water around obstacles while redirecting the corporate executives' desperate attacks. "You destroyed my life's work," Castellano snarled, wielding a chrome-plated pistol with the desperation of someone whose empire was collapsing in real time. Decades of building relationships, purchasing influence, creating systems that benefited everyone. "Everyone except the veterans you systematically persecuted," Seagal replied, disarming Castellano with a classic aikido technique that used the businessman's own momentum against him. You turned federal agencies into private security forces for your development schemes. The fight moved through the penthouse office, destroying scale models that represented billions in projected profits, while corporate awards and political photographs scattered across Italian marble floors. Each broken display represented lives that would be saved when Castellano's systematic persecution ended. The businessman's final gambit was a building-wide security lockdown designed to trap both men in the penthouse while his private security team eliminated the threat to his empire. "If I can't escape justice, neither can you." He gasped through broken ribs and psychological defeat. That Seagal's response was to force Castellano toward the office's communication center, where confession and evidence transmission would expose the entire conspiracy to federal agencies that weren't corrupted by systematic bribes. "Time to tell America what you've done to their veterans," Seagal said, activating recording equipment that would broadcast Castellano's crimes to the world. The real victory was about to begin. Steven Seagal's fingers moved across Castellano's communication console with the precision of someone who had spent decades infiltrating hostile facilities. The building's emergency broadcast system provided access to every television station, radio frequency, and digital billboard in Seattle, perfect for exposing systematic corruption to millions of witnesses. "This is going out live to the entire city," Seagal told Castellano, whose broken ribs and psychological defeat had transformed him from corporate predator into desperate criminal. "Time to confess what you've done to American veterans." The broadcast began with Castellano's trembling voice revealing the full scope of his conspiracy: systematic bribes to federal agencies, coordination with Deputy Chief Brooks to persecute homeless populations, and the use of terrorism protocols to eliminate witnesses to systematic corruption. "We paid federal agents to reclassify homeless veterans as security threats," Castellano gasped, his corporate arrogance replaced by terror as he realized his empire was collapsing in real time. Urban renewal was never about development. It was about demonstrating private sector control over government resources. Walter's evidence cache played simultaneously across every screen in Seattle, showing payment schedules, federal coordination, and documentation of systematic abuse that violated every principle of democratic governance. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, devastating to everyone involved in the conspiracy. Dr. Mitchell's medical records provided clinical documentation of federal crimes, while Jerome's reconnaissance footage showed coordination between federal agencies and private security forces. The systematic persecution of American veterans was exposed with precision that left no room for denial or cover-up. Mayor Hendrick's testimony connected directly from Sacred Heart Church, where the siege was collapsing as honest police officers arrived to arrest their corrupt colleagues. Federal agencies have been using terrorism protocols to protect private development schemes through systematic elimination of American citizens. Public response was immediate and overwhelming. Veterans organizations demanded federal investigations. Civil rights groups filed emergency lawsuits, and international observers noted similarities to authoritarian tactics that America had condemned in other countries. Federal coordination centers received thousands of calls demanding accountability for agents who had participated in domestic terrorism against American veterans. The systematic corruption that had seemed untouchable hours earlier was collapsing under the weight of public exposure and documentary evidence. A.S. Castellano's confession played across the nation. Honest federal agents began arresting their corrupt colleagues while SWAT teams at Sacred Heart Church laid down their weapons rather than continue systematic persecution of decorated veterans. The tide had turned completely. America's forgotten heroes had reminded the nation what warriors looked like when they stopped retreating and started advancing toward justice. Outside Millennium Tower, federal vehicles surrounded the building, but this time, they were there to arrest the real criminals rather than eliminate the witnesses. The final confrontation in Castellano's penthouse office lasted only minutes, but its implications would reshape federal law enforcement for decades. Anthony Castellano, broken both physically and psychologically, pointed his chrome-plated pistol with the desperation of someone whose empire had collapsed in real time. "You destroyed everything," he snarled, his corporate arrogance replaced by the fury of someone who had never faced real consequences for systematic evil. decades of building influence, purchasing federal protection, creating systems that generated billions in profit. Seagal's response was characteristically direct: systems that persecuted American veterans for private profit. The disarm was textbook aikido, redirecting Castellano's gun hand while simultaneously striking pressure points that caused involuntary muscle release. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as the corrupt businessman collapsed, defeated. By someone who understood that justice required personal action when institutions failed, FBI agent Patricia Rodriguez breached the penthouse door with tactical precision, leading honest federal agents who had been investigating the systematic corruption from within their own agencies. Mr. Seagal, thank you for your service to the American people. We've been waiting for evidence this comprehensive. Castellano's arrest was broadcast live across the nation as federal agents who had maintained their integrity despite systematic pressure finally had authorization to act against colleagues who had betrayed their oaths for private profit. Down at street level, the arrest continued with military precision. Deputy Chief Raymond Brooks faced federal charges for conspiracy, civil rights violations, and domestic terrorism. Sergeant Dale Morrison and Officer Rick Vance were led away in handcuffs while television crews documented the collapse of systematic corruption at Sacred Heart Church. The siege ended when honest police officers arrived to arrest their corrupt colleagues rather than continue persecution of American veterans. The Gothic structure had become a symbol of resistance that inspired the entire nation. Walter Kowalski emerged from the church, supported by Maria Santos, his critical injuries unable to prevent him from witnessing justice finally served. "Brother," he told Seagal through the radio network, "we held the line until you could finish the mission." Dr. Mitchell's medical documentation provided crucial evidence for federal prosecutors who would ensure that systematic persecution of vulnerable populations never occurred again. Her courage in documenting abuse had preserved evidence that corrupt officials tried desperately to destroy. Mayor Patricia Hendricks announced comprehensive police reform while embracing her daughter Karen, whose kidnapping had demonstrated how far corruption would go to protect private profits. Seattle will become a model for protecting rather than persecuting our most vulnerable citizens. Federal investigations expanded to other cities where similar systematic corruption had been reported, with Castellano's evidence providing roadmaps for exposing nationwide networks of private influence over government agencies. The forgotten veterans had reminded America that warriors never surrender when fighting for principles that transcend personal safety. 1 week after the Sacred Heart siege, Seattle City Hall steps became the site of a ceremony that restored dignity to America's forgotten heroes. Mayor Patricia Hendricks stood before national media to formally honor the homeless veterans whose courage had exposed systematic federal corruption. These warriors sacrificed everything for their country twice, she announced to assembled crowds that included veterans organizations, civil rights leaders, and federal investigators. First in foreign wars, then on American streets when they stood against corruption that threatened democratic institutions. Walter Kowalski received the Purple Heart that had been lost in bureaucracy for 30 years, his weathered hands trembling as he accepted recognition that should have been granted decades earlier. "This belongs to every veteran who served with honor and came home to indifference," he said quietly. Maria Santos was offered a position training police officers in de-escalation techniques, her Army combat medic experience providing expertise in treating trauma rather than causing it. "Healing should be our first response to community problems," she told reporters. Tommy Brennan became Seattle's new director of Veteran Services, his technical expertise and understanding of military culture making him perfect for coordinating comprehensive support programs. "No veteran should face homelessness in a country they defended," he declared. Jerome Washington entered a comprehensive PTSD treatment program while maintaining his role as coordinator for veteran security networks. His Marine Corps precision would ensure that systematic persecution never occurred again without immediate response from organized resistance. Dr. Janet Mitchell was appointed as Seattle's new police oversight commissioner, with authority to investigate misconduct and implement reforms that prioritize community service over aggressive enforcement. Medical ethics require protecting vulnerable populations from institutional abuse, she explained. Corporate donations flooded in from legitimate businesses that wanted to distance themselves from Castellano's systematic corruption. The old Sacred Heart Church was renovated into a comprehensive veteran services center offering housing, medical care, job training, and counseling. Federal investigations revealed similar systematic corruption in 12 other cities, with Castellano's evidence, providing roadmaps for prosecuting networks of private influence over government agencies. Congressional hearings demanded accountability from federal agencies that had participated in domestic terrorism. International observers noted that America's response to systematic corruption demonstrated democratic resilience when citizens demanded accountability from institutions that had abandoned their constitutional responsibilities. The veterans' resistance had inspired similar movements worldwide. Housing developments that would have displaced thousands of vulnerable individuals were canceled, with targeted areas converted into affordable housing for veterans and low-income families. Private profit no longer drove urban planning decisions at the expense of human dignity. The ceremony concluded with Walter cutting the ribbon on the new Veterans Services Center, his dignity restored through recognition that his service to country continued long after his military discharge. America's warriors had proven that true strength came from protecting others rather than personal advancement. 1 month later, Steven Seagal sat in the familiar corner booth of the Emerald City Diner, but everything had changed. His appearance was professional, clean-shaven, wearing a proper suit. While Walter Kowalski joined him for breakfast, his face showing the health and dignity that came from having permanent housing and comprehensive medical care. The trials are proceeding faster than anyone expected, Seagal reported, reviewing federal court documents that detailed systematic corruption reaching the highest levels of law enforcement. Castellano's plea bargain ensures 25 years in federal prison, while Brooks and his associates face similar sentences. Walter had gained weight and color in his cheeks, his transformation representing thousands of homeless veterans who now receive the support and respect they had always deserved. More importantly, the systems that created this problem are being dismantled and replaced. The Millennium Development Project had been canceled completely, with Castellano's assets seized to fund veteran services and affordable housing throughout the Pacific Northwest. Corporate donations from legitimate businesses had created sustainable programs that treated homelessness as a solvable problem rather than a criminal issue. Dr. Mitchell's comprehensive reforms had transformed Seattle Police Department from an agency that persecuted vulnerable populations into one that protected them. Use of force incidents had dropped by 70% while community trust had reached unprecedented levels. The federal investigations are expanding, Seagal continued. Congressional oversight committees are demanding accountability from agencies that participated in domestic terrorism against American citizens. Some changes will be permanent. Walter's response reflected the wisdom of someone who had witnessed both the worst and best of American institutions. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We stopped retreating and started advancing, but the fight never really ends. Seagal's secure phone buzzed with a new message from FBI agent Patricia Rodriguez, requesting his assistance on a case involving elder abuse in nursing homes across Washington state. The preliminary file showed suspicious deaths and financial exploitation targeting elderly veterans in care facilities. "What's next?" Walter asked, recognizing the expression that meant Seagal had found another injustice requiring personal attention. "Our brothers and sisters from the greatest generation," Seagal replied, showing him the case file. "Someone's systematically abusing veterans who can't fight back." Walter's response was immediate. "When do we start?" As they walked down Pine Street together, they were joined by Maria, Tommy, and Jerome, a brotherhood forged in battle and united in their mission to protect those who could not protect themselves. The forgotten veterans had become protectors of the forgotten. Seagal's new business card read, "Justice Investigations, Protecting America's Heroes." The cycle was beginning again, but now he had allies who understood that true warriors never stopped fighting for principles that transcended personal comfort. The story concluded with dedication. To the homeless veterans on America's streets, your service is not forgotten, your sacrifice is honored, and your dignity is restored. Warriors may age, but warriors never surrender. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.